comes to the surface. But then we're also seeing an increase in censorship and an increase in a reduction, if that makes sense of a sentence, more reduction in censorship of the debate and discussion in the public sphere. So you're allowed to talk about cannabis as medical as long as you stand on this script. As soon as you want to talk about agricultural, you have to go over here and stand on the hemp pedestal and talk about it over there. And then you have to stop from the hemp and then go, well, actually, we're going to go over here and talk. And they've deliberately diluted and created these false divisions within it so that there cannot be a consensus narrative. I mean, even just look at the reporting around the Billy Hood case. Billy Hood, who's a British, I believe he was a sports physio or something like that out in Dubai. And he was he was a work vehicle. He was dropping his mate off. His mate dropped like 4 bottles of, it's not really determined what it is in most of the mainstream press other than Sky News. They reported it as being CBD oil, partly because I think against a lack of education, whereas actually it was then reported by the UAE authorities and on the court records and again by Sky News through the case as being a synthetic analog. So it was a SCRA, a synthetic cannabinoid receptor antagonist. It wasn't just CBD. But then the way the British press had deliberately presented it as if this innocent man, and obviously we can argue about sort of whatever else. But in that sense, the British media then framed it as, oh my God, this travesty of this man being held in this draconian prison and these charges for a little bit of just CBD oil that can be sold freely here, with no irony of the fact that there are people in jail in this country for ounces of weed that is now being sold for like $19 in Oregon, if not less. They won't connect those narratives because they're paid not to. And it's not even a case of it's a conscious decision. The culture, the climate, the apparatus and the structure in which they operate will not allow them to ever string together these narratives and ask the ultimate question, which is, if they're allowed to get rich from it and they go to jail for it and it saves his life, but it apparently ruins his life, what's the truth? No one's asking for that because we can't have that conversation right now. And that's what I think is one of the most frustrating elements of this, that if you sell a cannabinoid product, you're not allowed to make a medical claim about it. The very nature of the infrastructure. So it's all designed to make it nice and vertically integrated, and you own every asset of that all the way through. And then what you do is you use your power and influence to stop others vertically integrating and creating opposition. So it's the opposite of what's supposed to be this free market principles, because there is no level playing field. We were never given an opportunity to start.
It's a bit of a strange paradigm, isn't it? So again, like that, this is really what this podcast about, is like trying to connect those dots together, because like we see it every day, like what you read in an article or what the average Briton hears about in the media about cannabis is so far removed from what you or I hear in the day-to-days of being in the cannabis community, industry, whatever. And for, again, like our industry to thrive, I'd like to think that everyone knows what's going on and is on the same page. But at the moment, it seems like there's a lot of confusion. It's very hard and very ambiguous. And there's a lot of sort of smoke has been drummed up to, I don't know, again, build that narrative, but not necessarily reflect what's going on or be fully exploring the context to all of these decisions and the policies. And it's just, again, holds everything back, stifles progress, and isn't really good for anyone. And doesn't, again, if all of this is being done in the public's interest and in the interest of safety, there needs to be some education around it. But again, that's not really part of the conversation either, which I find quite interesting. And so, lots of things don't add up, I suppose. And hopefully we can start piecing together some bits of the puzzle for people and just trying to make it more digestible. But as for, and again, that's really why you've got the podcast as well, No Simper, is just sort of like highlighting these conversations and bringing in just more perspectives, again, which wouldn't be heard otherwise, and having conversations that wouldn't otherwise be had in the mainstream realm. And so having spoken to so many very knowledgeable people yourself and interviewed so many, like a Tommy Chong, that's pretty, like that's super cool. And if people don't know what I'm talking about, Tommy Chong's like, I don't know, he's up there with like Bob Marley for cannabis almost in terms of like icon level, I suppose, or like Snoop Dogg as well.
Yeah.
And so Tommy Chong, who's been through, again, he's seen as we've been around, we're pretty young now, Simpa. Tommy Chong and other people, elders, have been around this sort of conversation for many years now. And so having spoken to people of that ilk, Simpa, like what are some of the takeaways that you've maybe had from speaking to those people, or insights and lessons maybe from those people that you'd like to share or you think valuable to this conversation?
Yeah, well, I think I'm in a very privileged, and I'm very grateful for the position that I find myself in. Although I say I find myself in, I've kind of created for myself, to be fair. In starting the podcast, is every week I've managed to sit down with somebody that I find personally and professionally very interesting. Someone who I feel has in some way answers, or can help me formulate answers to the questions that I ask myself every day. The burning questions that literally sort of not necessarily keep me awake at night, but are always ever present. That my curious inner child is always drawn towards going, yeah, but why? But why? But why? And so, yeah, that's afforded me, as you say, quite an opportunity to speak to some real influential and interesting individuals across across the world and across multiple sectors. And so what I found is humanity, whether it's an MMA fighter, or it's a doctor fighting for sex worker reform rights, or it's Tommy Chong, or it's a parent of a sick kid. They're all human beings fighting against a system that they can't quite articulate, they can't quite conjugate, they can't quite like bring into function and go, here's the thing I'm fighting. We can wake up each day and draw another piece of it as the fog and the Maya moves. We know there's a monolith behind the clouds. We know there is this ever-present wall of that imprisons us. But in these conversations, I've seen that it doesn't matter where you are in your so-called station in life, your position, whether that be class, race, gender, ethnicity, that humanity pervades. And I think that everyone I've spoken to in this, privately, publicly, professionally, and under contract, they all have the same concepts. And it is that this isn't working. This isn't going to work. There's a handful of them benefiting, and it isn't going to be us. And I've heard that from people that are already multimillionaires, people that are potentially going to be billionaires regardless. And they're still saying that this is wrong. There's something not right here. And when that many people can allude to the same thing, it gives me a certain sense of comfort, I guess. And that's what I found in this, is that I find commonality and I find community with everyone I speak to. I sit down for a couple of hours with them, and then afterwards we take out our phones, we pause it, we have a good 10 minutes, you have a chat, and you share that experience, the high of that interaction. It's like it's almost like a pseudo sport. Do you know what I mean? You sort of train for it, I guess, by learning and being aware of subject matter, and then you go into this this conversation fully aware of the fact that somebody could challenge you in any which way, and it's strengthening your sense of reasoning and your sense of ability to articulate and to really convey your point to another human being. And so I found that to be an invaluable process, that even though I haven't really been on the front lines, as it were, this year, I haven't led any protests, I haven't had a bullhorn going through a major city, or had to stand anywhere or shout at a cop. I haven't done anything of that ilk this year, because this year I don't think is called for it. I think there is a different reality that we live under at the minute. We're under what I hope to be a temporary structure, but for all we know, it could be the infancy of the new norm, in which case, ironically, that gives me more comfort back to, again, the same people going, something is wrong. So I think finding each other and having that conversation, and trusting that they may view the world differently, they may act differently than you, they may speak differently than you, and feel differently than you, but somewhere in there is that commonality and humanity, and there's far more of that than there is any of the things that will separate us.
For patients that are trying to navigate through all of this, would you be able to take us through the sort of medical process at the moment for how someone goes about accessing cannabis? in other videos and as we go, we'll speak to some like prescribers and things like that who are actually giving out, like are actually having to deal with this as well. But as you're like pretty well entrenched in the patient community, and I say the patient community, it's just like,
I was going to say I'm more entrenched in the cannabis community, but I do have an affinity for the patient community because I want to see them get safe, regulated, fair access. I don't want to see them screwed over. I don't want to see them in power and pay to build a new prison for themselves, in which they will not be allowed to explore alternative options other than what they are told will help them. And if it doesn't help them, they're forced back to criminality.
So on that note, would you be able to take us through sort of what the options are for a patient or for someone that is looking to legally access cannabis? Like at the end, I was going back to some of the conversations I've had with, say, Daryl Bickler and around reperceiving prohibition, and we'll get to this in time, but it seems strange that when, again, going back to human rights and what we've done with Seed Our Future and what have you, like, you should, as a human, you have a right to access these plants and these medicines if they're useful to you. And you're not like morally wrong for trying to access cannabis. Bodies are naturally aligned to it, and it's not something that you should have to bankrupt yourself in order to access, in my opinion. And again, this is something the UN's highlighted as well. Like, you have a human right to access these medicines to health, and some of the structures that are in place at the moment in the UK are really holding back those fundamental rights, and maybe inadvertently stepping on some of those lines, but it's making, again, for the average patient, it incredibly difficult and putting them in difficult loops to be able to get their hands on these products. And so again, Simpag keeps sort of rehashing this, but what are the options for a patient at this point in time, moving into January 2022? What are the options for a patient to access cannabis?
Well, yeah, I think that's a better reframing of the question. So I suppose then, you have two avenues to explore there. You have the legal, or I'll sort of air quote that, legal route, and the illegal route. So let's explore the legal route firstly. There is a sort of pseudo protection that is sort of created by a kind of supposed discretion that has been created by CanCard and others. Although CanCard are the only ones that have made the claim to have spoken to all of the constabularies and have an agreement with their heads of forces that if you are then in receipt of this card, it means that you have sent off to this organization, who have then contacted your GP, got access to a summary of care note, which is basically all of your active conditions, checked that you have gone through with previous interventions, therapies, treatments to legitimize then your access, and then you can be basically given afforded this protection, which is supposed to work as a tacit discretion, that if you are then stopped under possession, all of that rhymed, sorry about that, guys. If you're then caught under possession, that would give the police officer enough discretion to kind of go, well, actually, we actually should leave you in receipt of what you've got, or even take it off you, but not then give you a citation, not in any which way fine you, give you a summons or a criminal record. That, again, seems to be postcode lottery massively, and I'm not going to jump too much into that because I don't want to create any controversy around it, but that is the system sort of that's been created there. The other route is these private clinics, which then the clinics are linked to a pharmacy or a distribution partner. And so the clinics hire in specialists and people that can be prescribers for cannabis for certain conditions. They then run through a series of protocols. Once you've gone through the consultancy phase, as long as you meet the criteria, you can then be offered basically a list of prescribable products. This will then be delivered to you and fulfilled via this pharmacy partner. And like I said, I think there's nine or 10 maybe clinics at the minute. There's a few more planned, and several of them have become virtual clinics now, so you don't have to attend anywhere. You can just use basically Zoom calls. The pricing and the competition, or supposed competition, within the clinics has meant the pricing has dropped dramatically since their inception a couple of years ago, but they are still quite restrictive. There has been issues of sort of mold, contaminants and adulterants, mislabeling, and just poor quality, and patients being left several weeks without supply. Although on the other side, there have been a lot of very happy consumers. So it is seemingly an industry in its infancy and should be judged, I guess, over time, but be made to be transparent at this point, so we can see